So, the first podcast on Philosophy Workshop, and it's going to be from Spinoza's short treatise, which is one of the first things he wrote. And he changed his ideas in later life, but not drastically, really. Anyway, this deals with good and evil, and I've said it before, but compared with Spinoza, Nietzsche is a pussy. Spinoza just would have no truck with the notion of good and evil. So this is chapter 10 from the first part of the short treatise, and it's called What Good and Evil Are. Now, I'll read some of it, may end up reading all of it, and the text is below anyway, if you go to the website, that is. So he says, in order to explain briefly what good and evil are in themselves, we shall begin thus. Some things are in our understanding and not in nature. In other words, we have ideas and concepts which are our own private property, but they're not kind of out there. They're not real. They're just ideas that we have in our minds that we use because they're convenient. Anyway, some things are in our understanding and not in nature, and so they are also only our own creation, and their purpose is to understand things distinctly. Among these we include all relations which have reference to different things. Now this is important because when we're considering something like good and evil, then it's always a result of a comparison. So, for example, if rotten apples were the only apples you had access to, then you would never consider that they were bad. You would just say, well, these are apples and this is the way apples are. But as soon as you saw an apple that was nicely ripe and juicy, then you would suddenly say, well, all these rotten apples, they're crap. I want the nice apples. And there would be a comparison. You would have a relation that you form in your mind between the good apples and the bad apples. Well, it's the same thing in life. We consider something. So you go to a restaurant, for 10 years that serves, I don't know, egg and chips or egg and fries, and you're happy with that, and then somebody takes you to a restaurant that serves nice steak with a pepper sauce, and you really like it. You think, I'm not eating that shit again in that restaurant I've just been going to for 10 years. So it's always a comparison, good and evil. So is one person a good person or an evil person? You will make comparisons whether that person is going to benefit you or not, because ultimately here's how Spinoza defines good and evil. This is from his Ethics. Good is what is good for you. There are no absolute good and evil in Spinoza's world. Good is what is good for you, what helps you thrive, what strengthens you, what gives you power. And that's a whole nother discussion, because you might think that chocolate is good for you because it's nice and tasty, but actually in terms of your survival and your power in life, if you live off chocolate, then you're probably going to die fairly quickly. So that would not be good. And evil is what is bad for you. And in fact, this, I'm talking about the body there, but the whole thing goes a level higher, because for Spinoza, the only thing that is really good is the thing that helps you understand. And the only thing that is really evil is a thing that stops you from understanding. And so at that point we get into the whole idea of emotions and passions. Because if you are in a depressed state because you've just lost your job, you're not going to want to understand anything. You're just going to be worrying about getting another job and so on. So you're going to be dominated by that emotion. So emotion for Spinoza would be evil. Anyway, he goes on to say, since good and evil are only relations, it is beyond doubt that they must be placed among items of reason. For we never say that something is good except with reference to something else which is not so good, or it is not so useful to us as some other thing. Thus we say that a man is bad only in comparison with one who is better, Or also that an apple is bad in comparison with another which is good or better. Oh, there you go, there's some synchronicity. Synchronicity on the apples thing, that is. Anyway, all this could possibly be said if that which is better or good in comparison. Sorry, all this could not possibly be said if that which is better or good in comparison with the bad is so called, did not exist. So, having made a hash of that, but he's basically saying that this is a comparison thing we do all the time. And good and evil are relative to, the person or the thing that is trying to measure what is going to help them or what is going to hinder them. So an antibiotic is good for you in the sense it might clear up an infection, but it's definitely very bad for the bacteria that are in your system. So he goes on to say, therefore, when we say that something is good, we only mean that it conforms well to the general idea which we have of such things. But as we have already said before, the things must agree with their particular ideas, whose essence must be a perfect essence, and not with the general ideas, since in that case they would not exist. So basically he's saying that good and bad are ideas that we form. And if something agrees with what we consider to be good, then we call it good. And the other way around as well. As to confirming what we have just said, the thing is clear to us, but still, to conclude our remarks, we will add yet another proof. All things which are in nature are either things or actions. Now, this is, a fairly all-encompassing statement that the reality we experience either consists of things or processes, or actions as he calls them. Now, good and evil are neither things nor actions. So, if good and evil were realities, they would be defined as a process or defined as a thing. But he's saying that good and evil are neither things nor processes. Therefore, good and evil do not exist in nature. Big statement. The whole idea of a good God or a people being good or all that kind of thing, he just throws out the window in a single statement. Now, good and evil are neither things nor actions, therefore good and evil do not exist in nature. What a statement. And, I can spend 10-15 minutes talking about this, but ultimately you have to deal with that one yourself. Anyway, finally he goes on to say, for if good and evil are things or actions, then they must have their definitions, but good and evil, as far as, for example, the goodness of Peter and the wickedness of Judas, have no definition apart from the essence of Judas or Peter, because this alone exists in nature, and they cannot be defined without their essence. Therefore, as above, it follows that good and evil are not things or actions which exist in nature. So, the whole idea of good and evil, as far as Spinoza is concerned, is wholly bogus. And then you get on to thinking about, well, some guy who's a serial murderer, is Spinoza saying he's not good or evil? Well, that is entirely what Spinoza is saying. It gets more complicated than that, because then Spinoza goes on to say in other works that reason is the thing that would allow us to define what is good or evil within society. So society doesn't want us to go around killing each other. We've figured out that just having a totally random, lawless society would be fairly detrimental to everybody. And so we create laws. And you have to remember that the ideas of good and evil change from one culture to another. So in one culture they think it's a good idea to cut the skin off the foreskins of little babies, very often without anaesthetic. Other people find that revolting. In another culture they think it's good to cut the genitals of little girls. And again, a lot of people find that disgusting. But in those cultures it's all viewed as perfectly okay. So the whole notion of good and evil is relative, depending on what is good for us or what is bad for us. And as I mentioned, that extends to what helps us understand and what hinders us from understanding. And as such, there is no absolute good or evil in the universe. Immediately dismissing most of the religious ideas and bringing it down to a level of reason. It's cold, it's hard, but actually it helps understand how we behave and why we have to have societies and laws and so on and so forth. So personally, I think it's a clarifying statement.